Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed.
Today on the Paranormal Portal Podcast, we're going to be discussing a phenomena which we don't deal with a whole lot here on the show. I really want to dive into this a lot more going forward. I think that this very possibly is the phenomena that is maybe the most extraordinary in terms of the impact on our global society. I'm speaking about UFO phenomena and with some of the disclosure and stuff that has been happening with the quote-unquote admissions from the U.S. Navy and other departments that are showing a sincere interest in researching this phenomena, therefore giving it at least the credibility that it has never gotten before. Hey everybody, and welcome to the Paranormal Portal Podcast. I'm your host, Brent Thomas. Thank you all for joining us, and special thank you goes out to all of you who continue to support the podcast and continue to spread the word. Always remember, if any of you out there have experiences of your own that you'd like to share, feel free to email me at paranormalportalradio@gmail.com. Again, paranormalportalradio@gmail.com, and you too could be a guest on the show. A little bit hypercritical of those endeavors because I think that for a long time they had an active smear campaign against people that were coming forward with claims, you know, into the point of making them seem like ridiculous, unhinged individuals. And it's almost insulting that they're now coming forward with, well, we're going to start really addressing this problem and researching it. And they're having committees and subcommittees and congressional movement to substantiate protocols, et cetera, ad nauseum. So obviously this is a topic that is gaining steam worldwide. And I think that it's definitely worth exploring more here on the show. So without further ado, let's dive into today's topic.
If everything's ready here on the dark side of the moon, play the 5 tones.
So today we're going to dive into a couple of articles that I found dealing with either contact with extraterrestrials or abduction scenario, one of each. And both of these cases are incredibly powerful because they did leave behind at least some tangible evidence of that, either in the form of physical evidence of the events or witnesses that observed the events as well as the experience of the individual experiencing them directly. So I think both of these cases really stand out because they're not just empty claims. They are able to at least provide additional evidence of the events. And in the case of the witnesses, that seems to me to carry quite a bit of weight that the events that were claimed very well could have happened. So as always, you be the judge. The show is never going to be about telling you should believe something or you shouldn't, but we're just going to explore the events as they allegedly occurred. So let's get to the first one now. The first incident that we're going to discuss happened up in Manitoba, Canada, and this is pretty profound in the events that played out. And they happened at a location called Falcon Lake in the Canadian province of Manitoba. And it's an incredibly interesting series of events. But as you'll see, it's more than just a claim. The article states that on May 20th, 1967, 51-year-old Stefan Michalak, an industrial mechanic and amateur geologist, left his motel at around 5:30 in the morning and went up to Falcon Lake to prospect for quartz rocks. Suddenly, his attention was attracted to two oval objects, which were glowing red, appeared in the sky, and he noticed that the objects were coming down at a great speed towards the ground. One of them stayed up in the air while the other continued to the ground level and was about 50 meters away from it. So the objects are separate. One is in the air and one is on the ground. Now, after they stop moving, one on the ground and one still up in the air about 50 meters away, they began to change colors. And it says that they changed color from red to gray. The one in the air flew away to the west, and the object on the ground also glowed gray at first, and then changed to a color similar to hot stainless steel, which I imagine, I guess it'd be whitish red. I'm not quite sure what hot stainless steel looks like, but I imagine it's heated to a point of glowing. And it was surrounded by a golden-hued glow. So he was both curious and fearful at the same time, because he was witnessing something he had never seen before, never even considered before. For 30 minutes, he was standing near the rock where he was examining a quartz formation and drew a sketch of the saucer-shaped object. According to him, the UFO was about 12 meters in diameter and about 4.5 meters in height. But he decided to check it more closely, and so he approached to about 60 feet from the object. And he heard the humming, and he smelled a smell that was like sulfur. But he also heard two human-like voices emanating from the hatch at the bottom of the UFO, which did look like a door. Now, this article, which is, again, from howandwise.com by Vicky Verma, also includes the actual sketch that he made. And so I would refer you to check out the link in the description so you can see it for yourself. But it really is a pretty spectacular sight. The fact that he actually approached it is amazing. I don't know if given the same situation, would I have walked up to it? I don't know. That's a tough one. But anyway, let's continue. So according to the article, at first he thought that the object was an American experimental test vehicle. So he got sarcastic and said, "Okay, Yankee boys, having trouble? Come on out and we'll see what we can do about it." But he didn't receive an answer, and he tried greeting in different languages, but still got no response. Without any other thought, he put his head into the half-open hatch and saw something like a dashboard and a huge number of glowing lights. So he actually looked inside of this vehicle. That's absolutely incredible. Well, lucky enough, Michalak, who was, again, prospecting quartz rocks, was wearing safety goggles, and they did protect his eyes from the bright light, so it wasn't able to blind him as he looked in. But then he says the hatch suddenly closed again, and he quickly recoiled not to be pinched. But at the same time, he touched the outer surface of the mysterious spaceship, which actually burned his glove, and he received a burn on his hand. He said next the craft changed its position and a grid-like exhaust vent was facing toward him. A hot gaseous substance was thrown out in his direction. His clothes immediately caught fire, and only with a lot of difficulty he managed to put out the fire. The UFO flew into the air and disappeared, leaving Michalak alone with severe pain and nausea. So here he is, having approached this strange craft, got down, looked in the hatch, was able to observe the inside of the craft. The door shuts, and he touches the craft with his gloved hand, and it immediately burns his hand. He gets burned. And then there's this grid-like vent that suddenly ejects some hot gas that immediately starts his shirt on fire, which he's able to put out. and is then apparently feeling pain and nausea and trying to process the event. And he's quoted as saying, "I'm not so close-minded that I can't entertain the possibility that it's otherworldly. I can't discount that. But without specific evidence to show me that it is, I don't know. What I can tell you is that I'm an aviation fanatic, a huge aviation buff, and I'm very familiar with how aviation technology has advanced in the past 50 years. And there was nothing even close to that in the works anywhere at that time," he said. So following this incredible event, Michalak continued to have problems for quite some time following this event. And there's more to the story. And it says, during a subsequent medical examination, doctors found burns on his chest in the form of a mesh pattern, which fully corresponded to his story. In the following months, he had to contend with health problems such as loss of appetite, weight loss, swelling, and fainting. Well, Michalak died in 1999 at the age of 83, so he did live a pretty complete life, I guess, even in the aftermath of such an event. But it goes on to say, Stefan Michalak and his alleged encounter with the alien craft at Lake Falcon had been the subject of a big research, and Canadian UFO researcher Chris Rutkowski, who co-authored the book When They Appeared with him, spent many years studying and collecting countless documents, statements, photographs, and personal belongings of Michalak. Rutkowski told the reporters that Michalak had been treated at the Misericordia Hospital, where he was examined by doctors for the first time. Then he was transferred to the Mayo Clinic. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police and Royal Canadian Air Force, who were investigating, admitted that they had no explanation for what had happened. During the investigation, Michalak's welding gloves and shirt were examined, but nothing could be found in the analysis. A circle of 4.5 meters left at the landing site and area was declared radioactive. More than 50 years after the incident, Rutkowski transferred all documents and items related to this case to the archives of the University of Manitoba. It's a fascinating story, and apparently there's enough corroborating evidence, both in terms of the wounds that this man suffered. Clearly it seems like a case of radioactivity, radiation poisoning, in the aftermath, the burning of the gloves, the grid pattern on his abdomen from the vent exhaust, and the fact that there was apparently a piece of radioactive metal that was recovered from the site as well. Now, images of him, his gloves, his goggles that he was wearing at the time, and his sketch are all on the howsandwhys.com article, and it's called the Stefan Michalak Alien Craft Encounter. And I would encourage you to check it out, because I think a lot of times we're presented with claims of people coming in contact with UFOs. And most of those are simply anecdotal, my own included. I don't have any evidence to what I saw, what I observed. And so it's as much as I can corroborate it as to say, look, it happened. If you believe me, great. And if you don't, okay. And that's 99% of these kind of stories and claims are in that same vein. It's a personal experience at the end of the day, because there's nothing you can bring forward to substantiate the events. However, in this case, there is corroborating evidence that at the very least does substantiate that something very real happened to this person. And even he doesn't claim to know for sure what it was, but he does at least say, look, it could be ours, it could be theirs, I don't know. But I again, to repeat his assertion, he was familiar with aviation and aircraft, and what he observed and saw was like nothing around at the time. So an incredible series of events anyway. The fact that there's more to it than just a claim, I think, makes it incredibly powerful. The fact that it was officially investigated with no conclusive explanation, I think makes it incredibly compelling. And we don't often get this kind of corroborating evidence to substantiate the claims. And so, I mean, you be the judge as always, but I think there are so many reports out there where people claim to have come in close contact with UFOs, and the radioactivity claims are nothing new. That's nearly as old as the field in modern times anyway, with many people claiming to have what they believe to be radiation sickness, and or finding patches of ground where these objects apparently touch down that are indeed radioactive, and where plant life and insects won't enter in the aftermath of them. So that does seem to at least be something tangible to take away not only the anecdotal report, but the fact that there's this other corroborating evidence. So again, you be the judge, but this is one of those cases that I think are extraordinarily rare, with all of the abundance of additional information to substantiate the claim, even in the absence of any official acknowledgement.
I knew it. This is an alien, and you guys are from some government agency trying to keep it under wraps.
So now I decided to include an extra article that I think really matches up with another instance of close contact with what would be an extraterrestrial vehicle, at least. But this one is a famous case out of Minnesota from August 27th, 1979, and it involves a sheriff's deputy who was apparently not only sighted an object, but it hit his car, leaving visible damage and such, and he has missing time as well. So more than just anecdotal evidence of this experience. So what I did also find out on the top end of the article in the intro, in 2015, Metrocosm, Metrocosm, compiled 90,000 UFO sightings that had happened in the United States since 1905. Now, I'm sure there's even more now, but that is an incredible amount of sightings. And, think of any given person. You may think and be able to recall a handful of sightings you've heard of, but it goes to show you the body of evidence that is out there for those that are willing to look for it. And probably much, much more that has been observed and seen, but never reported. So they're here, in my opinion, and I don't pretend to know what they're doing, but they're here. So let's get into this account. And the body of the article starts out at around 1:40 a.m. on August 27th, 1979, 35-year-old sheriff's deputy Val Johnson was in his Ford LTD Cruiser patrolling on a state highway in northwest Minnesota. Suddenly, he noticed something strange that couldn't be explained, according to Johnson. He saw a ball of light hovering just a few feet above the ground that was visible for miles from his car. Well, he decided to investigate the matter, so he drove towards it. Well, at first he thought it was an aircraft with big lights from a nearby Air Force base in Grand Forks, North Dakota, that maybe had landed on the road. As the road was flat, he could see it, but decided to approach to check it out and make sure of what it was. And he's quoted as saying, "I noticed a very bright, brilliant light, 8 to 12 inches in diameter and 3 to 4 feet off the ground. The edges were very defined, and I thought maybe a semi hit a deer, or maybe an aircraft with one of those big lights had landed there," Johnson said. In some time, the bright light entered his car. It was so bright that he felt like it was hit by a heavy pillow on his face. According to official reports, It was the last thing he remembered, as he lost his consciousness for 39 minutes. And when he finally did regain consciousness, he found his car was in the ditch, positioned sideways in the northbound lane of the road. The engine wasn't on, but the headlights were still on. Well, he tried contacting his fellow officers on the radio and said that something had hit his car. One of his fellow officers had speculated that maybe a small car had hit him. But Johnson maintained that it wasn't a vehicle, and besides, his car windshield was broken, some lights were also damaged, and also both antennae were bent to 90 degrees. What's more, he had some bruises and felt a burning sensation on his face, especially around the eyes. The most shocking part of the story was that his wristwatch and the clock of his car were 14 minutes slower. One of the officers who was off duty arrived at the scene and found Johnson leaning against the steering wheel, as the burning sensation on his face was very intense, and he was immediately taken to the hospital where doctors were able to ease the pain, and later between 3 and 4 a.m. his statement was recorded. Ultimately, he had no idea what had hit his car, but the mark left by the thing became huge evidence for the researchers. His car was investigated by Roland Wardell, a metallurgical engineer from Honeywell, a glass expert from the Ford Motor Company, a consultant in hyperspectral imagery from the Brainerd Laboratory, and besides, a UFO researcher, Alan Hendry, from the Center for UFO Studies also visited him. From an encounter with the ball of light to injuries, a damaged car, and 14 lost minutes, his case was full of mysteries. Hendry could not find any specific explanation for his case. The pattern made by the crack in the windshield was extremely unusual, according to Ford glass expert. I saw a ball of light, Johnson said. I drove towards it, and suddenly it was in the car with me. It's inexplainable, but it will remain so, and I'm happy with my mental stability. So ultimately, according to the experts, a best fit explanation for the damage on his car was a highly charged electrical thing with enough mass and momentum to create the effects. However, the case was never solved, and the documents also vanished in years. Johnson's patrol car is still preserved and displayed in the Marshall County Museum with copies of the documents about his case. So an extraordinarily unusual thing. Now, I have to wonder out loud, could this have been ball lightning? Is that a possibility? I don't know that ball lightning would have a physical effect, but could it also have a magnetic charge or some kind of charge that could have bent the antenna and caused the strange impact on the windshield? I don't know how. Again, it's wild speculation, but then again, ball lightning is just this side of wild speculation too. It's kind of an unknown phenomena for the most part, with just theoretical ideas of how it's formed. Most often people attribute it to geological pressures and activities deep inside the earth that can release these charged plasma balls into the atmosphere. And I don't know. I guess it's worth mentioning just because that is an energized ball that could have been present for some unknown reason in northern Minnesota, but I don't know. It's an incredibly strange case, but again, it is an anomalous thing that he encountered. It did have a real, quote unquote impact, not only on his life, but on his car. And it was observable and studied, and there was nothing conclusive that was derived from this whole experience, except that we just don't know. So I think these cases are powerful, if only that they demonstrate that there's still a lot going on in our world that we just don't know. But again, this is a pretty famous case. It's been around obviously for a long time, and there's no new information on it, and I don't know if anything further could be gleaned from the car with more modern research techniques. But there are images included in the How and Why's article. And again, the link for the article will be in the description. And I think it's worth a look. Now, it is kind of curious in the narrative there. They said the documents also vanished in years, but apparently there's copies of the documents, or at least some of the documents, that are on display with the vehicle itself. So what happened here? I don't know. Is it for sure a UFO? Anybody's guess, but it's certainly an unidentified flying object. But is it extraterrestrial? Well, we just don't know. But very curious, and it does also follow the line of that there was an incident that happened. It was studied. There wasn't anything conclusive derived from the study of this incident, which I think also lends credibility to the incident as well. I mean, if it was hit by a pigeon, you'd find feathers. You'd find that it was hit by a pigeon. I think even back then, they could have ascertained if it hit a deer or something, and it was just that mundane. But it was obviously something else going on. So it is incredible and interesting. And, you know, again, you be the judge.
Our mission is to monitor extraterrestrial activity on Earth.
Now, finally, we move to the case of an abduction that was actually witnessed by other people as well. Now, interestingly enough, we think of alien abductions as happening maybe on a farm in Kansas, in a forest somewhere, or in some nondescript, lonely place. But sometimes the truth is even stranger. In this case, it was definitely not the case. Yes, forgive the redundancy there, but this happened in near the Brooklyn Bridge, of all places, and it happened in a very populated place. And we're talking, of course, about the story or the experience of a woman named Linda Napolitano that was apparently abducted. And it's an incredibly surreal, unusual experience. Not that UFOs are never seen in such urban areas. There's other people that have seen craft and such. I've interviewed a few of them through the years that appeared in very urban areas, and so it does seem that they just appear wherever they want, whenever they want. But oftentimes we're used to hearing the lonely farm incident, or out in the middle of the country, these strange lights appearing and things happening, but they sometimes happen right in our most populated areas. And that's extraordinarily unusual, but maybe that speaks to how they regard us. Like, maybe they don't really care if we know they're there or not. And maybe they don't really care what we think. They just kind of do what they do when they want. And that's kind of a sobering thought, I think. You would think that maybe there were some kind of rules at play here, but maybe there aren't. But anyway, what makes this case incredibly interesting is not only the fact that she was abducted, and not only the fact that she was abducted in such a populated area, but that this abduction was also witnessed apparently by 23 other people. So these are people that are in the area and watched at least part of these events transpire. Now, all of these people weren't obviously in her home where she was confronted by these beings and seen all the events happen, but they saw something going on that defied their own explanation. So let's get into the story. The story starts out, Linda Napolitano, who uses the pseudonym Linda Cortile, a young woman in her 20s, claimed that in November 1989, she had been pulled by gray humanoids from her bedroom window while her husband was asleep next to her. Soon after this horrific incident, she contacted Bud Hopkins, an American UFO researcher, who even wrote a book entitled The True Story of the Brooklyn Bridge UFO Abductions, describing the UFO events that occurred on November 30th, 1989, which really brings this event really into our modern age. It's not a deeply historic story as some of the other ones were. So I think that's very interesting. But it goes on to say, Napolitano, an Italian-American young woman, said that on November 20th at 3:15 in the morning, she suddenly woke up finding herself paralyzed and saw 3 non-human figures, gray in color, with big heads that were floating in her bedroom. She could not call her husband as the beings told her in their language to stay quiet. She was pulled by a blue beam from inside her apartment's window on the 12th floor in Manhattan, and she was levitating inside that beam with 3 other aliens until they reached a giant spaceship that opened like a clam. Now this too is a unique description of this craft. As most people that I've read that have witnessed these craft and witnessed them opening up in some way usually describe some kind of a doorway appearing where normally the surface appears seamless, but suddenly a doorway will emerge and open and occupants will come out or something to that regard. Now this one again described the craft as opening like a clam. And to me, that's incredibly interesting because I've never heard that somewhere else. I'm also not pretending to be an incredibly well-versed UFO researcher, even, academically so, but you never hear of these craft opening like a clam. But again, this was witnessed, so perhaps they can open up any way they decide to open them up. Maybe there's, we're used to our own methods and mechanics. And if you want to get into a house, you have to find a door. If you want to get into a house, if you can't find a door, you find a window. There are these predefined openings, but perhaps these craft are so advanced or well machined that anything can be an entry point, that perhaps this is a whole different level of construction that we just don't understand. It does speak to, the fact that they are extraordinarily advanced. If they could just define any way they want to open up, that it would open. That's incredibly intriguing in and of itself. But in any case, that's how she described it opening. So very interesting and unique. But she goes on to say, I'm standing up on nothing, and they take me out all the way up, way above the building. Oh, I hope I don't fall. The UFO opens up almost like a clam, and then I'm inside. I see benches similar to regular benches, and they're bringing me down a hallway. Doors open like sliding doors. Inside are all these lights and buttons and big long table. I don't want to get up on the table. They get me on the table anyway. They start saying things to me and I'm yelling. I can still yell. One of them says something that sounds like knobby egg. And I think they're trying to tell me to be quiet because he put his hand over my mouth. Napolitano could not remember much about what happened inside that ship, but she recalled some sort of medical examinations that had been done on her, and all she knew is that she had been through some procedures. Besides, she remembered that one of the aliens put something into her nasal cavity, and the pain was so unbearable that she lost consciousness. 3 hours later, she surprisingly found herself lying next to her husband, who was still sleeping. Interestingly, she did an x-ray of her head, and the doctor found something strange lodged inside of her nose. So she got an implant out of the deal as well. So that was her experience, and now we move into more of the witnesses that also saw us, at least some of this, take place. The article goes on to say, this encounter was not just limited to Napolitano. There were other witnesses. 2 security guards, Richard and Dan, confirmed to have been watching Napolitano with 3 humanoids, being pulled up into a large UFO hovering near her apartment. One of the guards felt guilty for not helping her and even suffered a nervous breakdown. And one of them said there was an oval-shaped object hovering over the top of the apartment building 2 or 3 blocks up from where we sat. So they were able to see her come out of the window and go up into that craft with those 3 other beings. He said, we didn't know where it came from. It just happened too fast. Its lights turned from bright reddish orange to whitish blue coming out of the bottom. Green lights rotated around the edge of the saucer. A little girl or woman wearing a white gown sailed out of the window in a fetal position and then stood in midair in this beam of light. I could see 3 of the ugliest creatures I ever saw. I don't know what they were, but they weren't human. Their heads were out of proportion, very large heads with absolutely no hair. Those buggers were escorting her into the craft. My partner screamed, "We have to get them." We tried to get out of the car but couldn't. After the woman was escorted in, the oval turned reddish orange again and whisked off. The article continues that actually Hopkins got his interest in Napolitano's case after he received a letter from Richard and Dan in 1991. Upon researching more on these 2 men, Hopkins found out that they were the bodyguards of an important political figure. Hopkins reportedly believes they were the bodyguards of former UN statesman Javier Perez de Cuellar. I'm sure I'm brutalizing that. Sorry, folks. The founder and director of Mutual UFO Network, Howard H. Andrus, strongly believed in Napolitano's story and called it definitely authentic case of human abduction by aliens. Andrus said, he knows what the ETs are after. They have been using humans to further their species. Cortile's story is familiar to Philip Klass, a former senior editor for Aviation Week and Space Technology magazine, known as the Sherlock Holmes of ufology. In his 1988 book, UFO Abductions, A Dangerous Game, Klass described the emergence of what he calls an alien abduction cult among UFO enthusiasts. The book examines numerous claims of ETs abducting young children and taking flesh samples, impregnating young women with alien semen, and then returning to remove their unborn babies for transplant into ET females. Now, it should be noted that the class person mentioned is actually he's a skeptic of all of this, and I think it's not really clear in the article up to that point, but the next paragraph kind of spells it out. It says, Klass devoted several issues of his UFO Skeptics newsletter to the Cortile case, uncovering implausibilities and major discrepancies in her story and its handling by Hopkins. For example, Cortile later added to her story that her son had been abducted by ETs 2 months earlier and that the craft that took her crashed into the East River. No such incident was reported by any witness. Klass said the 2 alleged security agents, Dan and Richard, have never been found, although Hopkins allegedly arranged for them to meet Cortile in her apartment. She later claimed that Dan kidnapped her from Manhattan Street and took her to a CIA safe house, and Klass said Hopkins claimed to have received a letter from the 3rd man who witnessed the incident, the world leader who refused to step forward. Hopkins reportedly believed it was Javier Perez de Cuellar, who was the Secretary General of the United Nations in 1989, despite mounting evidence against Cortile's story. Even some MUFON members are skeptical. Andrus called it a case of the century. However, there is much skepticism about Napolitano's case. Some people compared it with the sci-fi novel Night Eyes, originally published on March 1st, 1989, but at the same time, there are 23 eyewitnesses who saw this strangeness that night. So there's the case, there's the story. Now what I would say is that we only know of 2 witnesses from the narrative in the story. I'm not sure where the other 21 of them are and who they are or what they saw. So is there possibilities this isn't real? Sure. And any of this, I guess, is, to put it quite bluntly, a leap of faith. Unless you witness it yourself, it's going to be hard to jump on to anybody's story unless you're just a wide open believer to this stuff and are willing to accept anything. And there's nothing wrong with that, I guess, but I don't know. It's a bold story, and if it's true, it's both frightening and confusing and concerning, and any number of emotions jump to mind, really. But I think anybody that says they know what's going on, as was referenced in the story, that the MUFON guy knows what's going on, and it's for human tissues and impregnation and removal and re-insemination and stuff. I can't pretend to know. It's wild speculation because I don't believe anybody sitting down and interviewing these extraterrestrials to say, what are you guys up to? So I will say that part of the story, it is speculative at best, but there is something going on because there are people experiencing things that they don't understand. They don't know what's going on, and they're trying desperately to come to terms with it. Again, without blowing my own horn, I've seen actual UFOs before. I don't pretend to know where they came from. I don't know if they're perhaps some weird black project kind of thing or something else entirely, like extraterrestrial, extradimensional, any other insert term here. But I know that I've seen them, and it was both exciting and exhilarating and a little bit fearful as well, because I didn't know what I was looking at. I didn't know what they were and what they could want. And I guess the scary part for me was when I realized that they're probably looking at me too. And that was when it became a little uncomfortable. It was like, wait a minute. So before that, it was like this raw excitement, like, oh my God, I've been looking and there they are. They are here. But after that, I was like, wait, they're looking at me. What do they want? And so that was the end of my experience. But if you're curious as to the narrative of my whole experience and you're new to the show, I would just ask you to go back into the show archives. You'll hear me mention it several times, I'm sure, throughout the history of our podcast. But if you want to just hear several of my accounts, you can head over to Sasquatch Chronicles and listen to my episode over there with Wes, or on any number of other shows. I've talked about it on many shows. Cade Moya's Believe podcast as well, out of Australia, and several others. So it's not something I'm ashamed to talk about. I think it's amazing. And while I don't understand it, I know that I've seen it. I don't assert any other claims on it other than I've seen something I couldn't explain, and it behaved in such a way as it led me to believe it wasn't from here. And again, you'll have to go check out the narrative to get the whole inside scoop on that. Whether or not you believe in UFOs, whether or not you believe that they maybe are not only here, but are for some reason interacting with us on some level, whether it's experimentally or inquisitively or as a caretaker of sorts, it's generally up to the individual to assign their own narrative to that. But I just have no doubt they're here. But again, I don't pretend to know what they're doing. And so I guess that's the big mystery. And maybe someday we'll have some idea of what this is all about. But for right now, we're on the outside looking into this weirdness, and we're trying to understand and trying to come to terms with it. And that's basically the scope of the show. The Paranormal Portal is our journey into the strange madness that we're surrounded by. So I hope you guys enjoyed this, and thank you so much for tuning in and being a part of the journey. And until next time. we'll head back into the portal once again. Take care, everybody. Alright guys, thank you so much for joining us here on tonight's show. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Please feel free to follow us on Facebook, facebook.com/Paranormal Portal Radio, as well as finding us on Twitter. We're on Twitter at Paranormal Portal, P-O-R-T-L, and we'd love to have you stop by our YouTube page and subscribe and check out our shows there. We got hundreds of shows, journeys into the Paranormal Portal, so I hope you check it out, guys. We're over there at youtube.com/Paranormal Portal, so hope to see you guys soon. We'll be back, of course, for more podcasts in the coming days. So we love you all. Be good, be kind, be nice. Take care of each other. Help each other out. Find the magic in every day. And remember to laugh as much as you can.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.